Welcome to my mausoleum. Here I share with you scary stories, many of which are said to be true. If people think you're kind of weird too, then hit subscribe to join the family. So get comfortable as we delve into the darkness together. Here we go. Some say you can only find a true spiritual retreat within the untouched wilderness itself. Woodland, trees, lakes, rivers and mountains. They have some sort of root connection to the soul. And when you need to find yourself, you'll find yourself there. Well, that's what my sister said anyways, so I thought I'd try it. I'm not exactly an outdoorsy guy. For most of my life, I've been working as a cashier and playing video games. My earliest memories are inside because I hated the sun. I hated the snow, the bugs, just everything about it. I was a mama's boy, and I helped inside while my sister and my oldest brother spent their time outside playing in the weird copper-smelling hose water. It just wasn't my scene. However, now it's been about 23 years. I was 32 when this all happened, and I still remember everything. The whole cold-blooded nightmare. It was sometime around mid-November 2018. I had just gotten out of a nasty divorce. My only daughter was taken from me crying with her mother. She just mercilessly won full custody in a heated court battle. I was literally at rock bottom. I spent all my money on lawyers and caseworkers just to lose everything. And when I saw my daughter leave, in that moment, my ex-wife took my heart and what little soul I had left. I gained weight, I lost my job, and I pretty much lost my mind. But then, thankfully, my sister got to me. If it wasn't for her, I would have struggled alone in my despair, until who knows what would have happened. She had called me asking how I was. It was no secret in our smallish town that me and my wife were done, and I'm sure it was no secret that she won custody. I had my suspicions because ever since, people didn't look at me the same, staring as if I was an alien, and truthfully, even I didn't know who I was anymore. It would be years before my daughter could choose to see me on her own. And so what? Who knows if by then she would even love me the same way? So many things were going through my head, I had no idea what I was doing with my life anymore. I shared how I felt with my sister, and her response, "Well, let's go on a little spiritual retreat." Those words haunt me to this day, and now there's two things I vow to never do again. Never get married, and never go back into the woods. A spiritual what? I said. We're going hiking, then we're going camping, then we're going fishing. You have a lot of stuff to pack. I had to interrupt. No, you know I don't like nature stuff. I'm fine, I'm staying here, I've got stuff to do. There was no way I was going to find myself in some woodland paradise. Forget it. I was pretty close to hanging up the phone. "I'll meet you at the diner just outside of Gold Bar," she added in. And finally I submitted. That was a fair excuse to get a big tasty turkey sandwich, and whilst there, maybe I could talk her out of going anyways. It always seemed easier to talk to her in person. And eventually that day did come. I half-heartedly packed a case full of clothes, a few toiletries, and a refill for my inhaler. I was insanely asthmatic, so I always brought a refill with me just in case. I locked up the house and drove to the little diner about an hour out. I pulled into the dusty lot and parked my car. I didn't yet see my sister, so I checked my phone just in case maybe she said she would be late. But as usual, I had no messages, no missed calls on my phone. I decided to head in alone. I was hungry enough to not be willing to wait. I ordered myself the infamous turkey dinner sandwich. It was like Thanksgiving between two pieces of soft seeded bread. I knew from past experiences that I could eat more than one, but I figured I'd wait, and then wait some more, and then even a little longer, until eventually I felt my thigh buzzing. I pulled out my phone to see my sister calling. Finally, I muttered, sliding the green call button to accept. "Where are you? I finished an entire turkey sandwich," I said. "Sorry, brother, I just don't think I can make it today. You know I would have if I could, but the kids just got in the way. I'm so sorry." I'm not gonna lie, I did feel a little hurt, but I also felt a little relieved at the same time. No social interaction and no nature today. "Oh, that's fine, don't sweat it, sis. I'll go without you," I joked with her. We talked a bit more before we hung up and I paid for my sandwich. The little bell on the diner door rang as I headed out to the parking lot. I was walking back to my car. I've never been a superstitious guy, but I got this feeling about halfway back to the car that I was headed in the wrong direction. My heart was heavy, but something in me longed to follow through with this spiritual retreat, whether or not my sister was there. Maybe she would have just got in the way by talking too much anyway, and I had packed a somewhat normal bag of stuff. I had some non-outdoorsy clothes, a single pocket knife, bug spray and sunscreen. Oh, and obviously my inhaler refill. If I did decide to go, I'd just grab it out of the glove box. Yeah, I could survive a day or two, right? I figured I'd test the waters by taking a little hike that I knew about. At least it wasn't far from the diner. In fact, I could walk from here. Gold Bar is a pretty tiny town, hidden within the wooded evergreens of Washington state. The whole town is maybe half a mile long. Quaint little shops dotted the streets like a forgotten, sparse constellation. Everyone knew everyone, and I'd grown up there. It was always so cold in the winters, and even in the hot summers it got chilly at night. In a way, part of me felt comfort from being there that day after all those years of preferring city life. I shivered, zipping up my jacket, locking my car, and before I knew it, I was off. Thankfully, since this town was small enough, I didn't mind leaving my car there at the diner or walking to the trailhead on foot. I figured it would be a good warm-up and a jaunt down memory lane. And it wasn't long before I was there. It felt different. I only have one memory of this place. My mom took me here when I was very, very young, and she held me close to her chest the entire time we were there. It was beautiful when I was there with her, but now it all feels darker, gloomier. Maybe it was just because it was starting to turn seasons. The trees were yellowy green. Some were starting to turn more of a rusty tone. The wind was bustling. Something in my body kind of warned me not to continue. I stared down the trailhead. The trees almost seemed winding and unwelcoming, but I had driven an hour to be here. Well, in honesty, I drove an hour for that turkey sandwich, but still. It was time to trust my sister and find myself. I started easy and slow, but eventually the terrain became more challenging and uphill. I could feel my bones and muscles moving in ways they hadn't in a long time. Or if I'm honest, hardly really ever. It did honestly feel pretty nice most of the way up. I didn't start to feel the burn or my asthma until I was about to reach the last rest area. It was only about 3 miles altogether, 1.5 up and 1.5 back down. It wasn't until reaching that rest stop that I noticed my refill was in the car. But it wasn't the end of the world. I still did have a little left on me. I sat down on the wooden bench and realized how fast I had just come up that hill. I started to sweat pretty heavily. My whole face felt red and my lungs started to tighten up. I was fumbling to get my inhaler primed and take a puff, but I heard something. It sounded like your quintessential twig snapping in a horror movie. It was loud enough for me to stop everything I was doing, but quiet enough that I couldn't pinpoint exactly the direction it was coming from. Furrowing my brows, I looked around. Well, it was nothing I could see, so probably a bird or something, or maybe a squirrel. Those are the only living creatures out here, nothing to worry about, I reassured myself. I went back to shaking my inhaler, and it hit me that I could barely breathe. I took a long draw and held it in. Dang, it really was getting low. I started counting to 10, looking around to realize everything was now completely silent. No birds, no bugs, no bustling trees. It felt weird and uncomfortable, but at this point, I figured it was just me feeling alone or my regular anxiety. But it didn't take long for it to prove I wasn't alone at all. I stood up, putting my inhaler in my bag, and then taking it off to give my shoulders a rest from the 15-pound weight. Another snap. I swung around. This time I heard it a lot closer. Behind me, I see a deer. It was just staring at me. And I'm staring at it. Obviously, my hand starts to go for my phone to snap a picture when I noticed one of its legs. It wasn't very deerish. It's hard to explain, but something wasn't quite right. I swear it had a furry black foot, but just as I seemed to notice, it was changing in front of my eyes. I've read about these things online. I've seen trail cam footage, and I've heard thousands of stories, but never in my life did I ever think they were real, or that I'd be seeing one with my own 2 eyes. It seemed to know that I'd seen its mistake. It stood up on its back legs and towered 9 or 10 feet, maybe taller. My chest tightened even more and I made a noise that I'd never made before. A kind of guttural scream based entirely on fear. I knew I had to get away. The way back out of here, the route away from this thing, was rocky and steep. I couldn't run or I'd never make it back out of these woods. My chest continued to tighten. It felt as though bricks were being piled more and more on top of my lungs. Suddenly I noticed the woods were still and quiet again. A relief long enough for me to question if this was reality or just my perception. I guess I had been under a lot of stress for a very long time. But then it let out the most terrifying shriek. Human-like, but it wasn't quite right. It sounded like it was being pushed through a hellish, broken amplifier. I felt my eardrums vibrate as though they would burst entirely. My hair still raises to this day when I think about it. So I ran. I guess my instincts finally kicked in. Fight or flight. And I certainly wasn't going to enter into a battle with this thing. I was so stupid to run so fast. I was terrified, but I started making my way back down the hillside. Flailing, skidding, stumbling, just moving as fast as I could. In my panic, I left my bag behind, and in my bag, my inhaler. I was screwed, but I had no time to begin to think about rectifying this issue. I looked back for only a second as I ran, and I saw it clawing through the trees. It shrieked again, and I saw rows and rows of teeth down its elongated, deer-like mouth. At the end of its limbs, its claws were black, nestled in rough-looking feathers, like a crow's talons almost. Its face was distorted and broken up by pulsing veins. Its glossy, wet black eyes kept blinking at different times, seemingly independent from one another. It was not from this earth. I had never been so terrified in my entire life. I hardly remembered why I had come here in the first place. I just knew I needed to leave, to get back to my car. But I just couldn't suck in enough air to move in the way my brain wanted me to. I knew I was getting close. I started recognizing some of the natural landmarks, some of the shapes of the pathways. I was, thank God, getting close to the end, but then I collapsed. My every breath was wheezing. My throat felt like it was closing, like a drawstring was being pulled tight around my windpipe. Tears began to flood my eyes, and my body was just not cooperating anymore. No, I mouthed as I felt around in my pockets. If I could reach my phone, then 911 could at least track my location. And with the way things were looking, they could recover my body. I lifted my heavy head and looked back. An intense silence immediately shrouded everything. Once more, no wind, no bugs, no birds, and thank God, no more screaming. I couldn't see nor hear the thing, but I knew deep inside it was still looking for me. These seconds gave me the respite I needed to flow through my veins as I pulled myself up, warily, to my feet. I remained calmer this time, but if I was going to make it out, then I would have to walk slowly back down the trail. The path seemed to level out and was much smoother now. I just knew I was close to where I'd started. I have no idea how long this journey took, but finally I had managed to heave my failing body back to the trailhead entrance. I collapsed onto the smooth wooden sign, letting it take about 95% of my body weight. Relief began to slowly trickle into my mindset, flushing out a little of the panic that resided there. I turned back reluctantly to look behind me, just to make sure. And there it was, staring at me from a short distance, perhaps 30 feet, dwelling in the dense tree line. It stood there in its deer form. It almost looked like it was mocking me with its calm beauty, a stark contrast to what I felt chasing after me through the woods. "What are you?" I managed to say, but I got no response. The thing seemed satisfied since it turned and walked away, heading back from where I had just fled from. The deafening silence ended as though a mute button had been turned off. The cacophony of noises in the forest reinstated itself. I sucked another breath before finally leaving the trailhead for my car, and more importantly, my inhaler. I certainly didn't find myself in those woods, but I found a new fear and a new story to share. Most people think I was on something or I'm making it up, so I don't share this story with anyone new in my life. just sometimes to strangers on the internet, but sometimes, even to this day, I catch a glimpse of the all too perfect yet imperfect deer's face, gazing at me from the tree lines when I drive into town to the diner. I know I escaped this creature physically, but somehow I still feel it creeping in the back of my mind years later. That thing is stalking me, and I know we'll meet again.